Hello and welcome back to Weeknight Hero. As always, I'm your GM, Evan. Continuing in our campaign building series, next we're going to talk about narrative creation. So now that we've discussed the basics of a plot and the villain that creates obstacles for the player, now we need to fill out the outline with details and how your characters are going to overcome these obstacles to drive the narrative forward. The most basic building block of a narrative is the scene. Each scene should have a goal in mind and should further the plot. If the goal or plot in the scene is changed, it should change the scene. For example, searching a house for clues can be a scene, but if the whole house collapses in an explosion because the hero set off a trap, it would be best to change the scene because now the goal is to escape the house rather than search clues. These types of things are intuitive ways to get players to change their mindset and switch over into what the new scene is. You do not need to be Stephen King in order to form a driving narrative and create scenes. I noticed that so long as the scenes move the narrative forward and change settings or goals, even the weakest plot can feel fulfilling. One method is the lock and key method, where you list out every single thing a villain can do against the heroes. The goal is just to brainstorm what every challenge is and then list out the ways they can be overcome until you run out of things to brainstorm. And then you're going to form just a narrative around it. This is by far the simplest method and can be used to create even the most complex plots. So when you're doing this, you're going to list out everything you can think of, and then you're just going to match things together with what you want. If you want the first act to be more of an investigative thing, pull all the investigation challenges together. If you want there to be combat interspersed without, pick and choose which combat scenes work best for you. Another way to look at it, in fact, one of the first Game Master challenges I had ever run into was asking a hero to find the villain. And so they rolled for investigation, and technically they would have succeeded. So now I had to create a reason why they couldn't. So these obstacles should come up with a way to stop them and place barriers in front of them to complicate the narrative to make the villain more satisfying when they reach them. A second method could use film screenwriting or similar narrative structures to build your narrative. So there's no harm in drawing from what's already known. From time to time, I rely on standard film structure to write RPG adventures, and it can make for a solid form to build your narrative around because you can find at least 100 books regarding film screenwriting, how to build plots from everything. So my favorite format to use in this structure is the Japanese one, which is Kisho Tenketsu. Basically, each of these stands for different parts of the narrative. There can be an introduction, development, twist, and conclusion, and you can just build down from there. So it's all just using these same structural formats and building up your narrative one piece at a time like a Lego set. So this last method is my personal philosophy toward writing. I call it the driving narrative method. So imagine you're driving a car, and this car represents your campaign or your adventure, and your destination is the climax or defeating the villain. So using this driving metaphor, you're going to establish, is your drive going to be a 2-hour long drive, or is it going to be a 30-hour multiple day drive? If it's going to be just a 2-hour drive, realistically, how many stops might you have in between your starting point and your destination? This is very common with one-shots, where the idea is you're going to set up a simple plot and give everyone the opportunity to explore their characters. So maybe you're not going to stop. Maybe it's always going to be driving the plot forward and forward and forward. Taking a detour might be great for an adventure, and detours are absolutely needed for a multiple day, 60-hour, 80-hour drive. The length of time between your starting point and your destination is going to inform you what should feel appropriate. If you're taking a detour to something that delays your journey, is it something you should be doing unless it's worth it? If it's going to take another 2 hours on your journey, or your characters are going to get stuck on this detour, you need to decide if it's worth it or not, because you still know you need to make that very long drive, and you still need to drive back onto your main road. With time, I've realized it's always important to keep something like this in mind, where you're establishing, is your character, is your villain, or is the scene encouraging your trip forward and making that trip fun? Or are you stopping repeatedly and getting nowhere? Is it making you drive forward for an hour, then backward for an hour? A realistic choice. Is participating in a drive where everyone is just going to fall asleep for part of it a realistic goal if you're going to do a 30-hour drive? If you're in a 30-hour drive and people are getting sleepy in hour 5, maybe it's best to shake up the narrative or shorten your trip. So what does this all mean? I'm always about learn by doing. So I decided to create an example for our listeners. I decided that I'm looking for the type of plot. I want it to be mystical, and I want it to be adventure and travel heavy. So I am going to have my heroes fight Richard Warlock, who's an evil sorcerer. And Richard Warlock wants to find a character that the heroes can protect and use them in a ritual. So it's a very bare bones plot, but I can think of plenty of ways to make scenes around it. So because I wanted it to be mystical and travel heavy, we're going to have Richard Warlock summon demons to do his bidding. Each demon he summons is going to bring the heroes closer and closer to Richard so that he can grab the child and start this ritual. So the first demon is going to drive the plot forward. It's going to develop the scene. It's going to establish the detour by pulling them closer to the narrative conclusion by pretending to be a unassuming train conductor. And the whole goal of the scene is they're going to trick the heroes away from their initial path and force them onto this train conductor's path and deceive them and manipulate them the whole time to make them believe that this is not happening. So now we're looking at the obstacles in the scene. One might be to discover that this train conductor might be false, which might be like an insight check. Or it might be an imposed deception versus insight. You might rely on perception to realize that he has demon horns under the cap. And so the goal of completing this obstacle is to realize that the conductor is evil and defeat him. But the entire time we've been pushing the narrative forward by every moment they spend waiting, listening, deciding on things has only been getting them closer to Richard Warlock. So the second demon is going to be a tracking demon, and its whole purpose is to be annoying and loud, allowing other minion demons to locate them and distract them while warning Richard Warlock. Again, with this one, we're going to rely on stealth mechanics. We're going to rely on perception. It might even involve a lot of combat in order to find this tracking demon. And that tracking demon is going to stay as far away from them as possible while continuing to show their location. So it's another thing that is going to drive the scene forward. It's going to develop the characters a little more. And it's going to eventually lead up to this twist with this unexpected change, because this entire time, this demon has been allowing Richard Warlock to track the characters. So the third demon is a trap demon whose goal is to capture as many heroes as they can, potentially even capturing this child being used in the ritual themselves. So that's the twist. At the end of the scene, there's a high possibility that the board gets shaken up with the twist, and either a hero or this child or all the heroes are going to get taken further and closer to Richard Warlock, thereby setting the stage for the climax, where Richard Warlock now has access to this child sacrifice, and the heroes might repurpose the trap demon and have a climactic showdown with Dick Warlock and trap him in his own demon as sort of a poetic and ironic twist. So that's just one way that we can build adventure just using the various different formats. So I applied all of them in their own ways in order to create a generic plot. And of course, it's very, very bare bones at this point in time. But now that we understand what's driving the plot forward, now that we understand each of the story beats, now that we understand the obstacles that are in every adventure, you can decide what works best for your heroes and improvise, which is a majority of being a game master, I would say, is improvising your scenes. But you need to understand your scenes in order to improvise and break them. You need to know the rules in order to break the rules. But that about wraps it up for this video. These first 3 videos are a little more narrative and philosophical based, and they're going to be juxtaposed by the next 3 videos that we have in campaign building, which are going to focus much more on numbers and in the system. Once again, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, leaving comments, liking, and participating in the conversation. See you guys later.